All right, y'all, welcome to another edition of 368 Webinars. Make yourself comfortable. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to tackle a really important discussion about creativity. And measuring creativity is something that we've wondered, is that even possible? But according to Adam Morgan and some others, practicing it, apparently it is. So go ahead, make yourself comfortable. We're going to have another really fun webinar/workshop today. If you like the tunes and the jams, go follow TSE Work Jams on Spotify. I'll post it in the chat as well. And we want to ask here is make sure you blow the chat up, because, as always with every TSE event, we want to see what y'all got to say. Ask your questions. We're here to have some fun today and learn some good stuff. So go make yourself comfortable, y'all. It's going to be another good session. And y'all won't believe this, but I just found out, I thought Adam was 33 this whole entire time. And he just told me he was 47 and he had kids. He had a kid in college. And it was so weird when you find a friend that is so much older. I don't mean so much older. I'm sorry, dude. I'm still in shock, dude. I need to share it, dude. I'm still in shock.
That's all right. That's all right.
Well, anywho, y'all. Make yourself comfortable. I see people jumping in. This is gonna be such a fun combo, y'all. This is one of those topics that I just cannot wait. And you probably could tell by the vibes here. If you know anything about 368, we're gonna definitely it's gonna feel like passing a beer. It's gonna feel like we're hanging out. It's gonna be that kind of vibes. You know how we do it. Love the background. Thank you, Kristen and Corey. Pass a beer, virtual beer if I could. It feels like we're in a pub. We're just gonna relax. We'll go ahead and get started in the next minute, and it's going to be fun, y'all. Cannot wait. Make sure you blow up that chat room. Ask your questions, teach some others. What's up, Mendy? Long time no chat. Glad that you can join us. Super excited to have you. See some new names in here, but also some returners as well. Some former webinar speakers. Kristen, thanks for coming back. We're super happy to have you. And yeah, retweet from Adam. We'd be happy, happy for you to join. And Dane, I'll send you a picture afterwards on Google Images of a Maker's Old Fashioned. But all right, y'all, let's start the show. So look, first things first is we're going to talk about some of the guidelines here. And the guidelines for 368 webinars is we want you to be present. So that email, that Slack, that text message, or that cat video, please make it wait. You're going to learn a lot of really cool things today. So you want to be totally present. Use this hour for something great because there will be something good at the end. Next is engage. All right, look, the questions, the comments, blow them up. Make sure you go and say, instead of two, just the panelists, actually talk to the other attendees. We want to get the conversation going. When we get the combos going, the learning starts flowing. And finally, do the 72-hour to-dos. Tip here, anyone here that's been part of a 368 webinar, you want to be able to actually follow the to-dos that we have, because those things will actually help you take the information that you learn and then adjust to it very quickly. Because we've always been in those webinars where it's philosophical or it's something that you just can't apply right now. You can jump on with the content that we have today and just throw it into your rhythms. That's what we're really proud of at 368 when we have these awesome speakers come on by. So 368 here, it's the firm that we're a part of, and the mission is to challenge common thinking so that we can create a common future. And the definition of an uncommon future is that place that you can go where others can't, because others aren't bold enough to challenge common thinking. And the speakers that y'all have heard from the last few months, are all uncommon individuals that will teach you to challenge common thinking. So if you've been part of the past, you might have seen, creators in time of the coronavirus, Jessica Carson crushed it, Betsy teaching about LinkedIn, challenging convictions, how to build an innovation mindset with Fred. Really fascinating stuff. Then we had brand purpose and growth, human leadership with Kristen, in the chat room here, anti-racist leadership with Adrienne Parker. And our last one, storytelling with impact with Cheryl. All amazing stuff. We recommend that, if you missed one, you want to catch one later, you can just quickly go to the link here. It's 368.com/webinars. And if it's your first time here, you can catch some of the previous ones. All of them have quick 72-hour to-dos that you can take away from. But without further ado, this ain't my show. This is definitely, Adam's show here. We're so excited to have him. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my very young looking friend. I'm sorry, Adam, blew my mind. Who's actually spoken at a past conference that we had. So story on how we met Adam is that my business partner, Jeremy Bate, met him at Adobe Max. He had the speech about the neuroscience of creativity that blew the mind of a bunch of folks, including Jeremy's. And Jeremy, when we were planning for our Assembly Required conference, said, you know, the best speaker I heard was Adam Morgan. That'd be crazy if we can get him for our Creatives and Tech conference. We just shot him an email, and I was like, I would love to come to Louisiana. And sure enough, where he came to Louisiana, come to speak for us, and was enjoying crawfish at my place. That was quite a fun trip, man. And his stuff on creativity has been so fascinating. And recently, I asked him about measuring creativity. His response was awesome. And I said, hey, look, we got to do this on a webinar. You got to teach. And sure enough, he is. So, Adam, feel free to take it away, brother. I'm so excited to have you, man. Thank you so much, man. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, Kenny. Let me just quickly start my slide share here. I'm going to go with this one. All right. Sorry.
All right.
All right. Can you guys see it now?
We see. Yep. Now we see it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for the intro. That was nice. And yes, the crawdads were amazing. Loved it. But I'm going to talk today about measuring creative ideas. I'm Adam Morgan, an executive creative director at Adobe currently. And I've had a good 24-year career and have been dealing with creativity and how we measure it for a long time. But let me start out by just first telling you my kind of origin story and how this relates to today's topic. So mid-90s, I was working at a newspaper. And I was really debating on which career path I was going to go down, right? I thought about being an account guy or getting into strategy. I also, had done some design, a little writing. And so I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll do this creative thing. And I started exploring just kind of the world of advertising that had just been kind of blossoming in the 90s. If anyone of you were in the 90s, you know it. That there was this whole resurgence of creativity. So, and the reason why I have Ogilvy and Birnbach up on here is because these guys both represented the two choices that I had. David Ogilvy, we had his book Ogilvy on Advertising, and he'd had this scientific method of how to have the perfect ad and the size of the image and how much text and all this kind of stuff. Like he thought he had it totally figured out. And then Bill Birnbach came along, and Birnbach he was the father of creativity. And he just blew the socks off of everyone saying, you know what? It's not science. It's not about, knowing the exact right width or anything. He's like, it's all about being fresh and creative and new and trying new things. That's where the world is going. And so I was battling between these two choices. And eventually I ended up siding with Birnbach and saying, I'm going all in on this creativity thing. And I really loved the idea of like coming up with something new. I mean, in fact, I think I did a year of college. I did chemical engineering because I was going to invent something. And then I realized, oh, I hate these labs. And so I wanted to come up with new stuff every day. And so this idea of this path of creativity really seemed exciting. And for me back then, measuring creativity was just like, could you get in the award shows, right? That's like how you built your career as a creative, is just winning awards. But I want to talk to you about other ways of how we can find out how to measure creativity. So let's get into the topic. We're going to start out first. One thing I'm going to bring up before we get into some questions here for you is when I'm talking about measuring creativity, I'm not talking about normal everyday metrics that you use in marketing. For example, I've worked in a lot of B2B, and you have all of these metrics where it's like we're checking opens or signups, or we want to get a form or a wall in front of people, and once they sign up for something, then we can start to send out stuff to them and start getting AQLs and TAMs and MQLs and whatever else acronym you use to measure all of your marketing stuff. And that's great. And that's not what I'm talking about. Like that's more of how you're measuring your marketing campaign, how you're, getting through all of, the effectiveness, your sales cycle, all of that kind of stuff. And even at Adobe, the way we do it is, it's not even so much about people hitting a wall and being able to get past that, but it's more of like engagement. We can see through first party signups and our data co-op, and we can stitch together all this, all this stuff. and we really know what who the people are and where they're coming from. But for us, it's more about engagement, of like engagement metrics and their behavioral metrics and what are they doing. So, and that stuff is all great, but that's not what I'm talking about today. I want to talk about creativity. How do we measure creativity? Meaning, how do we know if one idea is better than another idea? And here's where I want your help in the chat real quick. I want you to start in the chat. Just tell me, what are the ways that you measure creativity? Here are a few that I've used in the past or I've seen be used. Focus groups, we'll throw out some creative ideas and see what they think about stuff, or online surveys, or we'll do some user testing, maybe even some expert interviews. But I really want you to start, light up the chat here of ways that you have tried to measure creativity, ways that you have tried to see if one concept is working or not. That'd be awesome. We see A/B testing. Yep, thanks, Dane. Engagement, people talking about it. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Again, some of these same things, user testing, feedback, all of that good stuff. Okay, good. Keep it coming. Gut reaction. I love that. So anyhow, I want you to just think about those. I'm going to get into it now in just a minute of like ways that we can measure and the ways that how we measure it that doesn't work. But before I get to that, I want to talk about one more thing. And hopefully many of you are familiar with the trade-off triangle. I learned about this, a couple decades ago, early in my career. I had a boss who said, listen, there's only three things we can go after. You can try and make creative stuff. You can either try and make it fast, you can make it cheap, or you can make it really quality. Like those are the only three things. And everyone in the business thinks, oh, we can do all three. And that is a fallacy. You cannot do all three. You have to focus on one, and maybe you'll get lucky if you get a second. So I want you to think about this in terms of like, as we measure creative ideas, what should we be measuring? Should we be measuring if it's fast, or if it's cheap, or if it's quality? That's really, really important. Okay, so let's get into creativity and measuring it. So the first point that I want to make is that creativity is emotion. Here's a great quote from Brian Solis. He says, where an experience is an emotional connection to a moment. Today in today's experience economy, right? And I'm sure many of you are dealing with that. It's all about amazing customer experiences. Like that's how you differentiate your company. That's how you succeed. It's no longer about you just pumping out messages to the audience, but it's like, what do they care about and how are you engaging with them and how are you giving them awesome experiences? And when you really break down what is an experience, it is this. It is an emotional connection to a moment. That is the job of a creative person. Like in my whole career, it's been, how do I find emotional connections and then portray those in an ad, in a web experience, in a story, whatever it may be. That's been my job, is how do I create those emotional experiences? And I really dug deep into this. In fact, we even at Summit, here's one fun story. Because at Adobe, we're all trying to balance, that art and science and emotions and creativity along with data and all of that. And so we had this woman, Ramana June. She had a company, and we brought her out to Adobe, and we set up this huge booth. And then just like, like in Back to the Future, she'd put this big headset thing on people, and we'd watch some ads or some little videos. And then it would spit out this huge graph that was measuring your emotions as you were watching it. And it did, it used a lot of things from like sight and pulse and so many other things that it was measuring. But it was really interesting just to see, like, as you would watch emotionally charged experiences, how your emotions would reflect that or not. At least for those of us who are not robots. There were a few people who were just very, very logical. But it was really interesting. We thought, this is so fun to just how we can measure emotion. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're saying. We're saying that creative ideas are emotional ideas. That's really, really important. And while it was awesome to do this thing with Rana June, and I talked with her afterwards and saying, like, how do you get this on the road? How do you help companies use the same thing in order to measure their ideas? It was so impractical. And I know there are some companies that are out there that are trying, like Brain Juicer, Millward Brown, System One, that understand like the fast and the slow systems. They understand logic versus emotion, and they're trying to measure emotion. But I would say that it's still in its infancy as far as like user testing. And so what I want to talk to you now about is just a few other ways that I've found that you can do this. You can measure emotions without having to hook people up to big machines. And just one quick thing, like this is just a hint of my book. So I spent like 7 years chasing this whole idea down about creativity and not just about measurement, but how do we understand it better? Because let's be honest, like in today's society, we put a premium on logic. And really, this is this balance between logic and emotion, right? That we're always battling. That was the thing that I had to solve in the beginning of my career. Do I want to go to Bernbach or do I want to go with Ogilvy? What was my path? And it's so because emotions are so hard to understand because they're in our subconscious. So that's why I wanted to dig into a few ideas, a few scientific studies that help us understand emotion a little bit better. So the first one is Paul Zak. Paul Zak is the father of neuroeconomics. And here's a cool story. Like he started out, he was on this flight and he was watching, I think it was $1 Million Baby on the TV. And he was just like crying his guts out. And he thought to himself, he's like, if they had asked me to give money to this cause, I would have unloaded as much as I had to them right now. And so he started thinking when he got back to his lab, he's like, how do I go beyond just, okay, we always talk about in marketing or in experiences, like to have these emotional experiences. But he wanted to find out, how do those emotional experiences translate into people spending money, people taking action and really, doing something rather than just feeling it. And so what he did is he came up with this awesome system where he hooked people up to, I don't know, it was fMRI machines and all these other, machines to just figure out and measure. And he could get to within an 82% accuracy. If someone watched a video, he could tell if they were going to spend money or not, if they were going to engage. And he came up with this simple formula. This is what he discovered. He said, if you want to get to action, the two ingredients you need are, one, they have to have an anomaly, which means it's got to be something new, unique, different, something, that you're not expecting, just something different. And then you have to have emotion, meaning you have to take that anomaly and wrap it in an emotional experience and have high emotion. And then if you have those two ingredients, that will equal action. That will equal people using money, spending money on whatever it is. And so how did he do it? Like his big thing of like, okay, how do we measure attention? Well, that was easy. He's like found out if we had a quickened heartbeat, or he was measuring the endocrine glands in the skin to see if there was sweat. So attention was easy. Emotion was the hard one. Like, how do you find out if people are really having an emotional experience? And what he found out was like the vagus nerve through an electrocardiogram. Like he could figure out if you had high extra hits of oxytocin in the brain that created this pro-social behavior of like caring about other people, caring about, kind of it, not just emotion, but empathy, right? So that was his formula. And while I go through that, there's no chance that people are going to be able to go and, run off with Paul Zak and hook people up to machines every single time they have a creative idea, and then be able to measure this to find out to an 82% accuracy if this creative idea is going to work. But the principle still applies. The principle that you need an anomaly and you need emotion. And that's the most important takeaway as we get into some other things. Because when I talk about, all right, how are the ways that we're measuring creative today? And we think about surveys or we think about focus groups, all of these things are measuring logic. They're not measuring emotion. And so they're measuring the wrong thing. They're measuring us, we're putting people in an unnatural environment. And when you think about focus groups, I don't even need to go off on that. Like there's so many books that have talked about how focus groups put people in this unnatural environment and they put on their special hat and say, oh, I'm going to solve this problem because they're paying me $50. So I might as well give them the best, most logical answers. And then it has nothing to do with their personal experience, right? Like they're just trying to solve your problems. Think about things like, in the Originals by Adam Grant, he talked about how Seinfeld, went through focus groups and it failed miserably. And why did it fail miserably? Is because people aren't used to seeing what's possible, what the new is. They'll just tell you, does this experience measure up to what is expected right now? And since Seinfeld was such a unique experience, no one could figure it out, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like when you're measuring creative ideas, now I'm not saying that these measuring techniques are bad. I'm going to get to that in a minute of where they're useful. But when it comes to measuring creative ideas, if you're putting creative out there in a focus group just to see which of the creative ideas is going to work, you're going to fail because they're just going to try and logically answer that question about their lived experience in the past, not what's possible. So that's a bad idea. Don't do any of those. So let's get into a little bit more. I'm going to give you a couple examples of ways you can measure creativity. And there's something interesting about this idea of like creativity as the scientific method. There is a growing surge in the creative field where people understand, what is creativity is really us going out there and testing and throwing a couple of emotional experiences out there to see if those relate with people, right? Like that's really my job as a creative person is to just explore the space of emotions and then throw some out there and see what works. If this one worked, great, use it more. So that's really the scientific method in action. So let's get into this first one. This is what I call, this is like, if you think about Paul Zak's formula, how do we use that in real life without having to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars to connect people to machines and get in the vagus nerve, right? So this is how it works. How do I build engaging content? First, use those logical tools to discover triggers. And that's, at Adobe, we call them insights. We go out there, you can do focus groups, you can do any testing, any logical tool you want. And you're not trying to test creative ideas. At this point, you're in a discovery mode. You're really trying to find out, what are the triggers of my audience? What does my audience care about? What are the things that matter to them? And that's fine. Like that, they don't have to do that in a real life emotional experience because they know the things that matter to them, right? Going out there and getting those human insights as to what they care about, that's what you need to use your data for. Discover those triggers. And once you have that trigger, now go out and create experiences. Go out and create experiences that have an anomaly and have empathy and emotion. I mean, that's just the job of creativity. Like if the science had figured it out way back when with Ogilvy and back in the day, we would have not needed anything, but that's not the answer. It's like science isn't going to do it perfectly for us every time. That's where creativity and emotion comes in. Like that's where it's this human experience. So use the triggers, create awesome experiences, and then here's how you test it. Measure against that. Do the creative experiences hit the triggers? If they do, great, put it into the world. Like that's your quick answer. You can quickly get a gut reaction knowing if I have figured out the triggers and I've built this model of creativity around it and they're actually connecting, then done. A plus B equals C. That's a perfect example. Let me go to a little more in-depth example of how you can try this out. And this is an example that we're going to give from VaynerMedia. In a way that, so their chief creative officer at the time, he and I met and we talked through this idea, and I think it's brilliant. So here's something to keep in mind. So this is a lesson that we're going to take from TV on how they do it. Because sure, in the past they'll do market research, they'll try and do focus groups, all the same stuff, but they've come up with a really good formula of how they can find hit shows and it works every time. And here's what they do. First things they do is they create a ton of ideas, a lot of pilots. You know this every year, we're like pilot season. They take a bunch of ideas and a bunch of new shows and they put it out there into the real world and just publish them, right? They're not testing them behind the scenes. They're not paying someone $50 to tell us what they think about some new show. They just put a bunch of pilots out there. And sometimes it works and sometimes it fails. Some shows work, some don't. And that's fine. That's exactly what they want. Because what are we really doing? Just like with that pilot idea, what you're doing is you're creating a variety of stories that we're putting into market. And then we see how people react to them. We see real emails, real ads, real whatever. You figure out what's right for you. I'm going to get to this in a minute. But then once you put all that stuff in the real world, and sometimes it's the easy answer is put it out into cheap, easy things like social media or email or something like that, where you're not putting a big media buy behind it, but like put a dozen ideas out into social media and see which ideas resonate, see which ones people are reacting to, and then focus and invest on those successes. Focus and invest on the pilots that work. And why does this work? It's because in this real world environment, it's working because it's in the real experience. You're not putting someone in a fake experience like a focus group or an online survey or any of these other things that make you switch your brain. It's really just in the world and it's happening and people react to it. You get real engagement numbers and real comments. And that's what we want. All right, so here's how it works. This is the simple formula. You start out, you know what the audience behaviors are, and then you make a volume of stuff, make a whole bunch of stuff, put it out there and test it. And this isn't just a testing method. This is a model. Like you get up a bunch of it in demand or in social, it's fast and cheap. And then when you get the data back on it, you know what's working and you just keep extending it and you go all in on the best creative. And this is different than like, if you know the way we've created ads over the last 20 years, it's been, we come up with a bunch of ideas, we float it up to the CMO and the CMO kind of decides which one they like. And then, we'll do rounds and rounds and rounds internally and no one will ever see any of this until we just land on the one that's blessed from the, from the leadership. And then that goes into market. And then we see if it worked or not. And we hope. Yeah, but it's too late by then. Sometimes if you're in the B2B and your sales cycle is a year and a half, you can't wait a year and a half for something to fail. And then you have to go back to the start, right? It's that dirty cycle. But if you're doing this model, data-driven creativity is what I'm calling it, where you're putting little ideas quickly into market, into social, into email, into whatever, then you're going to get quick responses on creative immediately. And then you know which ideas, like you could test a dozen ideas, whichever one works, then you keep moving forward. That is the model that we should be using moving forward. So we just put real creative ideas out there. You have to just have, just trust it and try some ideas. And the guy from VaynerMedia, he said it was really interesting. There were some of the ideas that he as an ECD would have said, no way, that's never going to fly. I'm not going to do it. And he would have stopped it. And those were the ideas sometimes that worked. So those were the ideas that blew up. So again, it's not just crowdsourcing. It's really just like putting real creative out there and finding which ones stick. That's what it's all about. Okay. So those were just two quick models that I've been using that have seemed to work. And when you see examples, like I'm just using it for examples in our current work at Adobe. But let me talk about another thing that we're measuring in this industry that I feel like is the wrong thing. We're not measuring the wrong, or we're measuring the wrong thing. And many of you have to deal with this, and that's timesheets. So for 20 years of my career, the way that we measured the creative department and we measured the efficacy of the creative department, if we were, firing on all cylinders, if we were doing everything we need to, is through timesheets. And I know there are so many people that are like, oh no, timesheets, we're just seeing, to see if all the work's getting done and if we're efficient. But let me talk to you a little bit deeply about the timesheets. Because let's go back to the trade-off triangle. Timesheets are measuring fast, end of story. And if I really think about creative ideas, the beauty, and have any of you who are creative or have lived the creative lifestyle, I have for years and years and years, and I'll tell you, big ideas don't just come on demand. They're not, like, I've gotten better at it, where I can be faster at it, but it's like your subconscious is working on things. It can show up when I'm driving home. It can show up when I'm in the shower. Like, who knows whenever those big ideas are going to come. And for me, creativity is all about quality. If you really believe in creative ideas and you want creativity to impact your bottom line, those need to be quality ideas. Let me dig into that a little bit more. So going back to not just the Paul Zak example, if you notice on his formula didn't say quick. He didn't say, get it into the people's mind as fast as you can. We have a short attention span, folks. We need to hurry. Because that's what we hear all day. We hear people have short attention spans, so you better get into their feeds so fast that they before they lose it. And they only have like 3 seconds and then you're gone. In fact, there was a study a year ago where they said that you have to put your strategy down to a 1-second strategy because of this social feed. Like, people are going to lose, or you're going to lose them in a 1 second. And I disagree with all of that. Like, everything that I've studied on brain science, it has nothing to do with speed. It's not about being below the fold on the website. It's not about, being a headline that's only 3 words. It's not about, a video that has to be 7 seconds long rather than 30 or 3 minutes long. Because here's the truth. Go back to Paul Zak. The things that connect with people are an anomaly and emotion. Anomaly and emotion. Not speed, not short, not time. Like, if you're building good content, you should not focus on time. You should not focus on length. You should not focus on speed. Those are the wrong things to focus on. If you create quality content that has an anomaly and is emotional, people will give you all the attention in the world. People will give you all the time you need, which means when you go back to that trade-off triangle, you need to be focusing on quality. You need to be focusing on experiences that connect with them, experiences that, that your audience craves, that focuses on those triggers that are emotional and connecting. That's when you're going to get all the time, everything that you want. And now let's bring that back to timesheets, because why are we continually focusing on measuring creative people's time? What we should be focused on is measuring projects, measuring the things. Like, what's the output you want from a creative team? You don't want their time. You don't want them to just slog through the day and just give you time. You want videos, you want ads, you want content, you want web pages. Then why don't we measure those things? We should be measuring the things. You could say, okay, instead of how many hours from a creative team, how many projects, how many videos, how many great emails, measure that over time. And in my bad experience, like, when we start measuring time, people are faking their timesheets. It's never real data. Like, I could go on and on and on. So the point here is, if we really understand science and we really understand the things that are going to make people act, those emotional things of value, those things that are where content has value, then let's also start measuring the work the right way. Start measuring the right projects and how many of those projects and how efficient we are with projects, and not measure people. Another thing to think about. So this is Jay Akunso. He's had a great podcast and following where he's talked about this in great detail, where he says, back in the old days, it was about getting attention. It was about gathering attention. But today it's not about that at all. It's about holding attention and keeping people's attention. In fact, he cut his list down from thousands and thousands down to just like a short list, and you can make just as much money for your business, which means if we're measuring the right things and we truly understand this, we should be measuring the community and loyalty. Like how many people are engaged and sticking around with us in engagement? How many great videos do we have that people watch again and again? Those are the things we need to start measuring instead of just like, okay, we go out and get a focus group, or we're gonna go out and do some user testing and they told us that this idea sucks and this idea is awesome. Great. Like that is just bad data. So if we want to have good data and we want to measure the right things in creativity, measure their experiences, measure engagement, measure, community growth, measure the number of the right projects. Go out and try some of these formulas that I said, go out and first find out their triggers and then see and then create experiences around those triggers. Or use the data-driven creativity model, where you put stuff out there in the real world so that people experience it and just give you the love and attention and loyalty, and then know what to go down and focus on. So those are some of my takeaways. Number one, remember anomaly plus emotion. If you remember nothing more, Paul Zach's formula, if you want to have success, that's what you need: an anomaly and emotion, period. And ignore all the other stuff in the industry that we chatter about. Next, if you want to really put this into action, create a volume of ideas and put it in the real environment. And then finally, stop measuring speed and time. If we believe that creativity can impact the bottom line, and I totally do, if you don't believe me, Rick, read my book. 100% creativity will impact the bottom line. Then we need to stop worrying about speed and time and focused on value and quality. Those are most important things. Now I'm just going to show you a quick example of how you could put it in practice today. Here's just a quick flow. If you wanted to try this out, go to your team, get a brief, land on a single trigger. Here's what we're going to figure out. Like, our audience cares about X. Let's focus on that trigger. Then the creative team can go out, explore 100 ideas, have a big internal review and narrow it down to like your top 10, great. And then start running them. Run those in organic social. And the best ones that perform there, put in some paid, right? And then do some paid banners. And if those work, great. Try some banner ads or some emails with those concepts around it. Just simplify it down to the simple idea, and then put it in the real environments out there so that people can experience it. And then you'll end up with a creative idea that is tested and proven and measured, and we know that it's a good creative idea and it'll work for your business, and then you can go in on your big campaign. Okay, the next 72 hours. Here's the request. So number one, email Kenny and you can get a copy of this deck, just as a reminder. I think that's really, really important. Number two, connect with me. I'm going to share with you just in a second here. Here are ways you can connect with me. Here's my email, or you can go to my website, adamwmorgan.com, and subscribe. Or for the last year and a half, I've been pushing out this new video podcast called realcreativeleadership.com. Go to realcreativeleadership.com. There's 20 something episodes already, where we focus not just like, there are a million websites out there on the craft of how you can be a better designer or a better writer, but there's very little on creative leadership. And so the whole point of this podcast, or this video podcast, is to focus in on how creativity can impact leadership and the business in a myriad ways. So there are a lot of episodes on there, how you can become a better creative leader and how you can use creativity in your leadership style. So those are a lot of great ways. And for anyone who, the next 72 hours, all of you who sign up on my website or subscribe, I'll have an email. So I'll pick, a handful of the top people who subscribe over the next week, and I'll mail you a copy of my book. And that will be just a fun takeaway in the next 72 hours. So thank you so much. And now I think we can get back to any Q&A or anything else you want.
Yeah, would love to do some Q&A. First off, Adam, thank you so much, man. It's weird. I'm seeing this for like another time. And it's just as like informative and definitely challenges your way of thinking, because, timesheets is definitely used as like that current, like it's hailed as like a control mechanism to make sure that we are doing things like accurately and within a certain budget. My argument is with timesheets is that sometimes like the reason why we have timesheets is maybe we don't understand actually what we're doing, or we don't understand like the brief itself, or we might not have the right people on the team. What's your take when it comes to like defending the argument about like timesheets?
Sure. I would say, Kenny, that it still is the wrong thing. Like, let me go back in my experience. Timesheets were, you waited to the last, like everyone hated it. And some people were kind of keeping up on it. And then you get to the end of the week, and you're like, oh, suck, I never did my timesheet. So you go back and you fill it in and say, okay, I think I worked on this thing. And then you're also worried, like, I don't want to put too much time into that project because then it'll go over budget. So I'm going to dump it all into this other project. Like, there's all the psychology of where people are putting time and why they're handling time. And you as a business leader, you're like, I want to know efficiency. I want to know who's working on the right stuff, like you said, or do I have the right people? But that's not the way to find out. Time isn't going to answer that for you. Time's only going to tell you how many people fake their timesheets and put it in this category versus that category. And that's not solving your answer or solving your question. Your question is, I need a good manager to be in there. And if I'm measuring projects and it's like, okay, for our creative department, we need to put out 6 videos this quarter or 10 videos, whatever that is. And this quarter, I'm only putting out 2 consistently. Where's the gap? Where's the problem? Then as a manager, you can go and say, okay, I can see that we're getting stuck in the script writing process. And so my writer's got an issue. Or I can see that it's during editing. I have to do dozens and more rounds of editing, reviews. No, a manager should be able to figure out where the gaps are, where the problems are, where the system's breaking down. Back in the day, I could do that as an ECD of an agency. And then, but looking at the timesheets just told me who was efficient in time, not who's being a better. Like, I could have someone who's completely efficient and the best on time because they're great at faking timesheets. But that didn't tell me if they were the best editor or the best writer. Not at all. As a manager, I'd have to know their work and who's really working hard. And, to be honest, there were like 3 different types of personalities that I dealt with. There was the one person who would say yes and accept all work, and they usually had the most work. And then there were the people who would say yes to jobs, but then complain about it all the time. Oh, I got all this other stuff to do. And then there were the people who would just like refuse and say they're stressed and busy. And they usually had the fewest amount of projects. Like, it's people management. I could easily see of those 3 different categories. Like, I want more of the show horses, right? That are going to accept it and try hard and have the hustle. And they will therefore produce better and more projects and more work than the person who's just putting in the time. So I still don't, philosophically, I went through it for 20 years and I don't believe that measuring time is the answer. I totally get that, leaders want to hone in on efficiency. Great. But again, go back to the trade-off triangle. Is the most valuable thing you could get out of your creative department speed? Is that what makes you a successful company? Or would it be really good quality creativity and you're building the right environment? I'm not saying that you make a lax environment where everyone's just kicking back and, watching movies all day. That's not an answer. That's the wrong environment. The right environment is one where they still have accountability. There's still deadlines. I'm not saying get rid of deadlines, but then to be accountability but an environment where people can experiment and try things and work on quality and not just about speed. And they're not like pitted against each other in this horrific, live or die environment, which I lived through many of those in the late 90s. So that's all I'm saying. Measure projects, measure the things, measure the output. If you care deeply about good quality videos from your creative department, measure that. How many good quality videos am I getting? And if I'm not getting that, then go dig deep into it as to why I'm not getting that thing, and then go from there.
Yeah, you don't start from timesheets. I love that answer, man. This is a kind of tangential question from Rachel Stewart. How do you recommend we influence others in an organization to prioritize creativity over time so that hopefully we can get out of the cycle of it's always been done this way?
This is a question I get a lot. People will come up to me after presentations. They're like, Adam, okay, I work for this trailer manufacturing company and the CEO does not believe in creativity and is not giving, the good credence to it. And I'd say first, as a creative, you need to do your homework. You need to figure out what's the business model that you're in. And I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but what's the business model? Because there's a good book, I'll have to look at the name of it, but there's basically 3 business models that are always repeating themselves. It's either operation efficiency, customer intimacy, or innovative products, product innovation. And so like my company, Adobe, we're a product innovation company. If you were like a Walmart, it's going to be operational efficiency. It's all about how do I get products through faster and speed to market and then in mass quantities, right? If you're a bicycle shop down on the corner, it's going to be customer intimacy. It's all about that relationship you build with the customer. So you first need to say, and be honest, what business are we in? If we're in a product innovation or customer intimacy, then creativity will make a big difference. If you're in operational efficiency, the creativity will help, like design will help. I'm not saying it's not going to matter, but that's not going to be the driving force behind the business model. And so you will fight an uphill battle every day. If you're working on getting, tractor trailers sent out as fast as possible, the most creative stuff in the world isn't going to matter because it's all about efficiency. So that's where operational efficiency model kick in. So, but if you're in the other two, then yes, then you need to go through and you need to prove to your whoever it is that creativity really does impact the bottom line. That's why I wrote that book. That's why there are a million other, resources out there. That's what my, half of my podcast is all about, is helping people prove to the right stakeholder why creativity is important. And there's many different ways of trying to prove to someone. And it's really hard. Why? Because most of the people who are in leadership positions, they don't come from a creative background. They come from a finance background, or they come from an operations background. And that's just the reality of life. So how do you convince the logical thinkers that emotions are important? And many of them don't believe it. So that's what my whole book was out. Like, how do I prove that to a logical thinker? But I think beyond that, there's just great examples that you can show depending on their style. Like, you can go back and try and, show proof points. Like, I have a million, if anyone reaches out to me, I can give you a whole list of here's why creative companies have impacted the bottom line more, or here's why, design thinking has impacted the bottom line more. I have dozens of studies. Luckily, science has caught up with us, and we have a lot of proof points. It's just getting those leaders to believe it and actually listen and look at all those proof points. Yes, experiences. Yes, creativity. I mean, Adobe's all in on that. Experiences and creativity impact the bottom line in a story. We've got enough data on that. So now it's just a matter for you got to do some tests. Try this thing that I said. Go do it in social. Put some creative ideas out there and see how they compare and how they work. And if it's an emotional draw, then you'll probably get a better response. And then you can go back to your numbers person and say, okay, these ideas are working better. We've proven it out. Now, believe us and trust us that we're going to spend, X amount of money on a big campaign that's actually going to work.
Yeah. I love that. And it's so important to know what kind of company you are. Like, if you're like, there's a conflict, obviously, like that tension will be so unhealthy until what it could be. I'm reading this book right now. This is just side note. If anyone wants to read it as well, it's called like No Rules Rules. It's by like Reed Hastings from Netflix, where they're a creative company. And it's so fascinating on how like they measure creativity there. Like, this is kind of like what's spurring on this convo. But let's talk about like creative management then. So look, we got one from Mindy Robinson. She's helped our conference for many years. In fact, I believe she was your sponsor for for when you came for our conference.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So Mindy asked this question. So let's say a creative team is under new management, and that new management is having a difficult time realizing the value of what the creative/marketing team does, because so much of what they do is not metric driven. They report projects and workload, but do you have any advice on the best way to show their value?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that gets back into, you're right. How does management measure the creative department? And it's usually through time, right? We talked about that. How many projects they do and how efficient are they? So to move away from the efficient story over to the value or quality, really what I would say is the number one thing you have to do is you have to have some good creative hits. Like, unless you have some of those, they're not going to listen. So number one, focus on your craft. Go out there and create some awesome stuff, whether it's a video that just gets tons and tons of engagement, or some email campaign that gets tons of engagement, whatever it may be. Like, isolate it down that it's this emotional idea, this creative idea that made a big impact, and then go back to that later and say, okay, great. It's like, here's how many, if you want to see how efficient we are for it, that's fine. But it's really about quality. If it's the value of what we're bringing our customers, that's what's going to make a big impact. Again, you could start with a lot of data of why experiences matter, why making great customer experiences matter. There's so much out there right now. But I would start with that. I would say, like, great experiences matter. Here are our experiences. The ones that did really well are XYZ because they had this element in it. And we're happy to prove it out again and again. But that's how you need to start measuring us as a creative department out of the value we bring. And if it's like, okay, and I know it's tricky because even, for me, most of my career, I haven't had the normal metrics that the rest of the marketing department has. Like, they're being measured on AQLs, or they're measured on, how many sales lift, or whatever it may be. And if you want, you could try it. Like, you could easily say, great, I'll take on a number. I will take on, X number of engagement, right? Like the size of the community, or the number of engagement. But then you'd have to say, you have to trust the creative team to just go out there and build it the way they want, and then try it. And it may fail or may not, but if it does succeed, then you have to believe and let us go. But more often than not, people won't want to. They'll just be like, okay, you can own the number, but really we're owning the number and you're not really owning the number. So it's really hard to wrestle away that number and just have the autonomy and the accountability on your own. It's really, really hard. So I would say, if that's not going to work, then partner up with your marketing team, partner up with them and say, here's what I believe in. Have a conversation when there's not a project, like not in the middle of the big, when you're coming up with the big campaign, but before or after, and then try and get them on board with why creative ideas matter. And then do some of the, the examples where you put something out there in social or whatever, grassroots it. I think that's just the right way of doing it. Like getting them to understand the value will only work if it actually impacts the bottom line. That's when they're going to listen.
So you have another question. So what are some good KPIs to set for the marketing team so that they know where to aim?
Okay, so if you're going back to marketing KPIs, I would say engagement score. It's no longer just about clicks or opens. You need to say which ones are they engaging with? And we have this interesting formula where it's like an engagement score is made up of like how many touches, how many different experiences they have, how long were they engaged with the experience, did they come back to an experience? You can figure out whatever the right formula is for your business, but I would say create an engagement score. Create something that says, here, we know these are real people and they're really connected and they're sticking around with us and they're looking at multiple things or they're staying around for a long time, like whatever that is for you. But start measuring engagement and not necessarily just, okay, how many different, emails do we get on the list? Who clicked through the wall and on the gated asset? Who did whatever it is, like standard B2B stuff? Or, to be honest, if you have a product that's really fast and timely, meaning it's like a B2C product, sales are going to help a lot with that. Like if you can just boost sales, right? So depending on the model of your business, figure out what that engagement score could be. And I think that's a good place to start with your marketing partners.
That's awesome, man. Some quick questions here. What are the other two types of businesses? So operational, I believe you said product innovation was one.
Yeah,
and
product innovation, operational excellence, and customer intimacy. Those are the
intimacy.
three. So if you really look at all business models, and that's like business strategy. We're talking business strategy, right? Like how are they going to go to market? It's usually going to fall within one of those three categories. Yeah. After the show, I can get the link to the actual book that tells you that. You can look it up.
So what's the, how do you sign up for the book giveaway was another quick question. You want to maybe type it in the chat where people can go?
Yeah, sure. AdamWMorgan.com. Go to AdamWMorgan.com and just subscribe to my list. And that's just where, I'll probably just be sending out emails, mostly, around the Real Creative Leadership when I publish a new session. That's usually what I'm just sending out the email for.
Is the book
there it is, Disciplined Market Leaders.
That's
Thank
it.
you, Tom Tate. Thank you, Tom. You've been connected for a long time on LinkedIn. Thank you,
Tom. Coming through, man. I just connected with Tom too. That's awesome. Good job, Tom. Coming through, man. Woot, retweet on that, man. So other questions, man. It seems like there's a more creative. It seems like there is more creative output / content in the main metric, but quality is really important as well. Is there a metric that you can define that takes priority, like regularity and consistency? Like what's that main metric for creative output and content?
That's interesting because what the person is asking for is like the golden arrow of like, oh, we just measure this and then we know if creativity and value is
I would love that answer.
I would
pay
love
a lot of money.
That does not exist. Everything I've already talked about, like there's no perfect answer of just like, oh, you got to measure X. Like that's why we're making up engagement scores. That's why we're trying to figure out, maybe for you, it's like this, how much of your audience sticks around or engages with you on something or does something. I don't know. Like there's not a perfect golden arrow answer that's going to be like, oh, measure this. And then suddenly value is there. Value is created with our audience when we know what they care about and we give that to them, right? Like if they're following us because whatever, like let's say with my Real Creative Leadership, because they want to learn to become a creative leader or become a better creative leader. And so they're finding value in the content and they're going to keep showing up because they're learning something, they're growing, they're getting into that flow state. Like that's how you get there. And so there's not a perfect answer of just like, oh, you like Ogilvy would have figured it out in the 60s if that were true. And it's not, it doesn't. It's because the human condition changes all the time. Like when you really study humanity and understanding, like there's some great books on the brain and neuroscience, like it's a team of rivals in our head. Even why we're not robots is because we're not going to give the same answer every single time, even in the same conditions. We're going to do different things all the time. And we're emotionally going to keep flipping around all the time. So humans are impossible to understand. Like there's not like a, tell me the value of what you're feeling right now every single time, because that thing is going to change for me day to day. So the best way I can do is keep trying to understand you, keep trying to understand your triggers, trying to understand your emotions, trying to understand what you care about, and then deliver content that is that value, brings value on those on those triggers, on that data, on that stuff. That's how you're going to do it. And then you build loyal audiences, and you keep telling them, you keep using emotional advertising that makes them feel awesome. I'll tell you, like for me, Adobe, before I ever worked at Adobe, like I built my career since the mid 90s in Adobe and Photoshop and InDesign and all that kind of stuff, right? But when they came out with their creative class video a couple years ago, right before I started, where it was like, we understand you as creatives. You're in the bat cave and you're designing with markers, and you're going to change the world, and you care about all that touchy-feely stuff. Like that rang true to me. That video just like landed squarely in my emotional, lockbox. And so I know that they've got me, and I will follow and be true to that, because those brands that find the right emotion that resonate with their audience, they're going to create that loyalty. And so that's what it's at. There's no perfect answer on this, but it is great finally that it's not just all scientific. Like we can use creativity, can use emotion, data, all of that stuff together to create experiences and then get good loyalty.
I mean, for me, it's personally grasping that you can't measure everything either, and everything isn't meant to be measured. Like you try to measure everything, like can you imagine how slow things would be? Like there has to be some gut on
Totally.
these decisions,
Totally. And from when we did that other experience when I came out there with you, that was what I talked about, like the marketing gut. Like we want to get rid of the gut and just talk about, oh, it's data driven now. We don't need the marketing. Like and that's hogwash. Like I went through and proved, and into my book too, why when you actually, like, your gut is a huge receptacle of all of these past experiences and all this, good and bad and testing and a whole bunch of logic, which means it's just communicated through an emotional gut, but it's really like 10 times the amount of logic that's been done in the past. Why would you not listen to all that logic? Why would you just put it away and say that's worthless? It's totally valuable. It's just as good as any other study that you put out there.
Yeah. This is a pretty good one on like kind of like where your head's at, is from Lynette White Pierce. Hi Adam, this is great information. We're inundated with information and the channels by which this knowledge is coming through. How do you stay informed on changes that impact the creative world? And how are you focusing on trends and changes that matter? Do you have a go-to place? Like how do you stay informed?
Oh, that is such a good question. And I don't have a good answer. I mean,
Books behind you maybe? Like
that's exactly why I created Real Creative Leadership, because there are a lot of websites out there, but they're just about like, here are a few places depending on what you're needing. Like Adobe, we have an all up, it's like an online magazine that will be giving you info on like the latest trends in creative styles and colors and art and illustration and all that kind of stuff. So if you're saying where's a good tap on the latest creative trends, great. Like that's one place. You can go to Adobe. There are dozens of other companies out there that are like, here's the cool creative trends. But that's about the craft. So if you want it about the craft, Adobe and others have you. Go to those. If you're looking for, okay, what are other trends in maybe strategy, then I would say your best bet is to read books. There are just hundreds of books out there, and you just need to keep, like I say, you got to read to lead. Like you got to read. And there are podcasts and other things that are out there that are on strategy. But if you want, for me, creative leadership, if I want to say like, okay, where are the trends on where creativity is impacting business, or where creativity is helping improve how you set up teams, how you set up the machine, how you create an environment, all of those types of things. That's where Real Creative Leadership is going to fill in that gap of like, go there, and we're just going to keep, one session I'll talk about my lived experience, and then I'll invite a creative leader or a marketer or a CMO on the show, and we'll talk about their experience. That's what that show is all about, of just like creative leadership and how it impacts teams and structure and organization and all of that good stuff. So I would say it depends on what you need to stay up on the creative stuff. For me, how do I keep up? I keep up by reading a crap ton. I listen to tons of podcasts and things, and I go to a lot of webinars. I go to a lot of conferences. That's where I'm keeping up on creative trends and strategy and where the world is going, and just, staying connected with all that stuff. So I would just encourage you to do the same thing.
Yeah. So we got a question actually from our very own Corey Schneider. Um, for a team that is juggling multiple accounts, what is the best way to gauge a designer's maximum utilization? You're gonna hate these words if you're not using the if you're not
Start
using
over.
time as a metric. Usually, the common way is to ask a designer, "How long do you need to complete this project?" In parentheses, time. What should you be asking instead? Like, what should the operations person be asking?
That's fair. And I would say here's maybe an easy switch for me. It's when's the deadline? Because I'm not saying that you don't have to be timely and have a deadline, but
Mm,
deciding the deadline is totally different than give me a number of hours. Because then the number of hours are going to just be like on whose time? Project manager's time to say, okay, here's when those 8 hours are going to fit into the day. Whereas if you ask a designer, when can I have this due? And they say, sure, Monday morning. They may procrastinate until the very last minute Sunday night and then get it done real quick. And maybe it doesn't take 8 hours. Maybe it does. I don't know. And it doesn't matter because what you're asking for is, I want a quality thing at this time. So you should just agree on the deadline and not worry about how much time it takes you to get there.
yeah.
Does that work?
Let's hear from Corey. Hopefully, yep, he says love that.
Tom's
I
bringing
know
it.
we're gonna talk about this too. Use the Whelm scale. What's that?
The Whelm scale is something that I created, years ago, maybe a decade ago. And then I started noticing that there were always people who were saying, oh, I'm totally overwhelmed, or there are people who are totally underwhelmed. But I couldn't substantiate what does that mean, like how whelmed you are. And so I took across a whole bunch of data of like how many projects you have per week, how many big meetings, how many big presentations, how many, how are you even taking lunch? How many, how long later you're working? Like I took all this data and I put it across this grid of a scale of 1 to 10. And I said, you just need to figure out where you need to land in the whelm. Like you should be perfectly whelmed in the middle, not overwhelmed or underwhelmed. And you can go to this grid and say, look, oh, okay. And the reason why this is important is because there was one person who may be completely overwhelmed and they have like one project and everyone else has 10. And then I know, okay, they need to step it up, right? Because they're just living in their own world and not seeing how they're balancing the team. And there could be someone who takes on 10 projects and everyone else has 3 and they're not overwhelmed at all. And that's fine. So it's really always like an aggregate of all these things because it's not just how many hours you work, but it's like, if I'm doing a big presentation, that's going to take a lot more cognitive load, right? For me to figure that out. Or if I have to do whatever. So it's like taking the balance of all those things and aggregating it across and then looking at your team. And I go every Monday and say, okay, how whelmed are you? And they look at the grid and they go, okay, I want to say I'm overwhelmed, but I know that I'm like totally on the number 2 and everyone else is on 6. So I can't say that, I can take on more, right? So it helped balance out the team. And then it helped everyone understand that I'm not checking timesheets to see if you're getting enough stuff done. On our production meeting every Monday, I'm just going to, we can find out if someone's whelmed or overwhelmed or underwhelmed. And then that's easy for me to say, okay, good. We're going to get more to this person or this person can take on more. Like it's just kind of a self-measurement category so that everyone else jumps in and it doesn't just mean the manager is like assigning crap and not knowing who's busy or not. And that way everyone comes together. So that's what the Whelm scale is. If you want to figure out, go to Real Creative Leadership. I did a whole session on the Whelm scale. You can learn all about it and get a copy.
Dang, Tom is like your hype person, huh? Feeding you the material.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, Tom.
That's funny.
We're going to tackle 2 more questions. One is, how do you lead clients to filter the best insights? I thought that was a good question.
This is a good one. So what I do is I go back to the creative process, right? How do you as a creative person get to that eureka moment? You start out by inundating your brain with a whole bunch of stuff, the brief, all the past ads, anything around that topic, that industry, whatever. You just load yourself up with a bunch of stuff. And then you start trying to, execute a bunch of ideas and you come up with, dozens and dozens. And then you just kind of let your subconscious brain go to town, right? And you're just finally relaxing and it's still working when you're not thinking about it. And then all of a sudden you're in the shower or you're in a relaxed state somewhere and bam, eureka, the idea comes. And then you figure it all out, right? So the best way to go to stakeholders or partners is say, let's re-engineer that same process for you. Because if I come into a meeting and I throw, a dozen ideas on the table, and how are you judging it? You as the partner, you're just gonna be like logically looking through and say, here's my mental checklist. Is this hitting 1, 2, 3? Nope. Yes. Right. And then you just say, go with the option, 6, which is the safest, boring, lamest idea and has no emotional quality. And you're just going to go with that because it's hitting your checklist. Instead, I'd say, okay, before you even look at these ideas, I want you to go through that same experience. And there's been good studies done where like some CEOs, when they come to a meeting, the only purpose of the meeting is to absorb. and they cannot make a decision during that meeting. And you have to sleep on it, and you have to let your subconscious work its magic. So all I would say is, okay, stakeholders, here are the ideas. We're going to go through the ideas with you. I want you to just feel them. I don't want you to judge them. I just want you to absorb them and then walk away and then let your subconscious work on it. And I want you to just think about how you felt with each idea. Don't go through your checklist. Just think about how you felt. Put yourself in the audience's shoes, and then go off and just sleep on it. And then we'll come back and we'll make a decision later after you've had a chance for your brain to think through it. And hopefully you'll get that same connection. You'll make those same connections in the same eureka moment. And then we'll come back and then let's have another meeting the next day. Or I know that seems implausible, but there's sometimes people are really good at just like listening to the emotional, quality of the ideas rather than the logical quality. And those are good leaders. So yeah, you just have to talk with your partners and say, put yourself on the journey. If you're reading this article, don't start, nitpicking off the bad stuff. Just go through your experience. How did you feel? Were there moments you felt good, bad, whatever? Like that's the kind of feedback we want, is you trying to experience that and then connecting with both emotion and logic. So then the next day you can look at the list, and sure, if some ideas are completely off strategy, they're gone. But if they're on strategy and you felt something and it like hit that anomaly in emotion, great, let's try it. Go with it and be brave.
I love what you said about the unconscious mind. I mean, dude, I've been going through this thing where the last year I realized I thought being really decisive was a strength, but what I was actually really bad at was the uncomfortability of not making a decision right there and then. It was actually a weakness where it's like, oh, the real reason why I'm making a decision now is I feel like I don't want to put it off till later. But that like length of time is where that creativity starts kicking in, especially when you're not working on it. I used to like kind of poke my business partner who's actually on the call, Jeremy Bate here, who actually was the one that reached out to you.
Jeremy's
Like, yeah, Jeremy, huzzah. Like, Jeremy, I used to poke fun at him as like, what's like, sometimes he'll procrastinate to make a decision, but he'll make it right on time. And the decisions usually were like something I didn't think about beforehand. I started noticing those patterns. I realized this is when being overly decisive is a really big weakness, is I'm trying to be so ops minded. Let's keep going and going and going. Well, I'm not looking for a more creative answer. And I think that's what a lot of folks fall into, is that, I have my operations mind on, not my creative. And people will say I'm not a creative, but really at the end of the day, everyone is a creative.
Go back to the trade-off triangle. When you're quickly trying to make a decision, are you doing it because you want to be fast, or you want to be cheap, or is it value? Like, focus on value maybe for a little while and say, what is the value we're bringing our audience? What is the value I'm bringing my employees?
Yeah. Look, y'all, I know we're over time now, but I'm going to ask you one last question, Adam, because everyone's wondering, because you have a giant bookcase. What's like one book on creativity? If you want just to like say like, hey, read this, I'll start getting you wired the right way, or ask your team to do a book club on this. Like, what would you recommend for folks to read when it comes to this kind of subject?
I would do Creativity Inc. Creativity.
Oh yeah, right. That's such a good book.
Like, do that first. That's good. Like process, team building, like structure, all that kind of stuff. There's some really good things.
Creativity Inc. is such a great book. That's Pixar, y'all.
Pixar.
Yeah, that's I lock in that so much. But yeah, I bet you it's up there.
It's right there in the reds.
Yeah, it's right here, right behind me too, man. It's such a good book. We actually just read it in a book club ourselves. Highly recommend it, y'all. But while we're gonna close off today, we want everyone to go back, enjoy their day. Hopefully, some of these things like definitely provoke some like really interesting ideas. Don't forget to email Adam. Don't forget to email me for a copy. We're super happy. Thank you for joining us today. And Adam, you crushed it, man. Today was one hell of a convo, and we appreciate
I am the tiger.
I am the tiger, baby. But with that being said, take care, y'all. Thank you. Awesome. I'm seeing great comments here. They love you, Adam. We appreciate you. We'll see y'all next time, folks. We have another really awesome webinar coming up soon. But until then, keep creating and stay focused. Looking forward to it. Take care. Adam is a creative hero. I love it.